Andrew Miller is the managing director of Hilco Digital Assets, which is basically him bringing all of his expertise and experience and network to Hilco and to create this arm of Hilco Digital, and which is really doing some really great things. So let's go ahead and bring him up so he can do what he's going to do. He's going to talk. He's got a bit of a presentation, and if there's enough time, I'll come up with him at the end, and we can do a little bit of chat, maybe some Q&A. All right, bud.
Last time I did this, I did not need glasses, so this is where we're at. So hopefully we'll have enough time to bring JT up. So it's pretty amazing to be back here with this group. I've seen all cycles of the domain industry, from every phase of it. And if there's one positive that's come out of the COVID era, that it's really taken digital assets and especially premium domains to the next level. I was looking around this crowd this week, and Soren's done such a great job getting people here. You know how at the Oscars, at the Super Bowl, they tend to pan to somebody in the audience and celebrities and say there's Emma Watson or there's Bon Jovi. We have this crew of OGs, Monty and Rick and Slavic and Frank Schilling back at Namescon, for the first time in a long time, and that's been pretty amazing. And then what's kind of blowing me away is I met this, there's a whole new group since I was last here of people in this industry that are just adding to the excitement and the growth in the last 5 years, and that is a really good sign for this. The last time I was a keynote in person was Rick's second Traffic. Actually, I think it was Domain Fest. I forgot about that one. But Rick's 7 Traffic with my buddy Zappy, and that was a long time ago. But premium domains have really remained one of the best and most steady asset classes since then. So I was putting a lot of thought into what am I going to do today in 20 minutes before JT came up. And I usually just tell stories, and I don't have any notes of any kind. But I wanted to write it out today so we could kind of hopefully impose some value here. So that's why I'm doing that. But I wanted to try to do something that would be meaningful for domain investors, buyers, sellers, and the asset class. I kind of view premium domains as their own person. What would be helpful for that? And I started to think about the stories of my own success and how can that help others and help domains. And a few keys stood out to me when I was doing that. I'm trying to kind of spread the message by dispelling some myths, which we'll talk about, discussing some secrets to premium domain deals, and they're not really secrets, they're just tactics. And hopefully by doing that, we can evoke some change in either the thought process or the practice to create a better value for this amazing asset class. So some of what I'll be mentioning are the concept of reported sales, the irrelevance or lack of appraisals, selling the domain versus championing it. I have a hard time with that word. The concept of marinating domains, casting a wide net, and who is the most likely buyer of buyers of a 7 to 8 figure domain name. I've been involved in a lot of 7 and 8 figure deals, said humbly, at all sides, founder, investor, broker, and I kind of decided to pick 2 stories, bookend stories for this to kind of get this message across today. So the first one takes us back to 1998, what I call BG, before Google. My partner and I at the time wanted to transition from airing our content on television networks to airing them on the internet. And we had just produced television shows with multiple NFL teams, the New England Patriots, the New York Giants, the New York Jets, with the Grateful Dead, and we had actually just done the first ever cybercast of a concert, a major concert, the Allman Brothers from the Beacon Theater in New York to the world with Microsoft, and believe it or not, on AOL dial-up, which was a whole other story. And we learned so much I really learned about the internet from these partners who were early adapters. The Grateful Dead were selling T-shirts on the intranet before Amazon. So we saw it as internet, and back then, before Google, most people were accessing the internet by typing in a domain name into their browser, right? There was no Google. It was, AOL and Yahoo was kind of the search engines, but they weren't a big deal. And we decided, let's go after the largest advertiser category on the Super Bowl, right? Big money. And we said beer. So, we figured that would have the largest built-in audience. And we went to beer.com, and there was a posting on the website right there, front and center, that said we need sponsors so we can buy more beer. And along with that were pictures of college kids puking, pictures of who had the largest beer gut. Matter of fact, it was just like these kids were brilliant. It was like social network and, 20 years before the social network and Web 2.0. And so we ended up acquiring 80% of the domain name from this junior at the University of Colorado because he wouldn't sell all of it for $80,000. And my partner happened to be a large vendor to Miller Brewing Company, big time, like that was their biggest client. So we went back and forth, brutal flight from Boston to Milwaukee to meet with Miller executives, and we were planning to do some joint development venture together that in hindsight absolutely would have failed. And we were 90 days into this when we get a random phone call from McKinsey, the consulting firm, a partner there, who was consulting Interbrew, which is now InBev, but Interbrew was Labatt, Stella Artois, Bass-Ale. And he's like, can you come up to Toronto? We want to talk with you. So tomorrow. So we flew up to Toronto, and there we met Rocco, the CMO of Interbrew. And after some small talk, they presented us with the long strategy outline of how they were going to shift 1% of the beer market over the next 20 years using the internet. And it was actually a pretty brilliant plan when you kind of look back on it. And then they said, we don't want anything to do with you guys. We just want your beer.com. And they reached across the table and handed us a check for $2 million and said, what do you think? And we said, kind of taking Kate and Rick's advice yesterday, we'll sleep on it for 5 minutes. We walked out and came back in and said, nah, we're partnering with Miller. We work with Miller. And we went back to Boston. Got on a plane, went home. And the next morning they called and they said, what will it take? And we said $10 million. And they immediately, I don't know where they got the number, but they immediately said, how about 7-2? And we're like, yeah, we'll do that. The rest was kind of history, but the key to the story is Rocco. Rocco had a plan, and for that plan, he wanted beer.com. And he was a champion at a large corporation, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more. But we found out that he had saw that we had acquired beer.com because we put out a press release back then, shortly after we did, and that it immediately became his must-have for his plan with McKinsey. And after that, it just became a negotiation, right? And when I tell my second story, which is about last year's mega home.com deal that I did with my friend Larry Fisher, it will highlight the importance of having a champion. But before we get there, I wanted to address some of the myths I mentioned earlier. So the first one is this concept of reported sales. And I've been outspoken on this for years and in social media. And while there are pros and cons to any position, I believe it's a myth that reported sales are relevant to making a deal. We know DN Journal does this great job, and Ron is one of my favorite longest time people, and I love what he does. And bloggers like Jamie and Elliot and George, who go dig up these unreported sales and make them public, are awesome. And whenever possible, but almost every major domain deal will go unreported. And in fact, I make it a point to make sure my transactions are under NDA. Because if I'm a buyer or I'm representing one, why would I want anyone to know my price? It just anchors me in the future, in any future negotiation. So if I'm a seller, the only real value is self-promotional, and frankly, you could do better without blowing the deal's cover. So in fact, most merger and acquisitions of major companies have those two words in their press release, undisclosed price, right? Almost all of them, except for publicly listed companies that have to report large enough deals. And the reality is the price one company pays for a domain is completely irrelevant to what someone else may be willing to pay later. And I say this all the time. These are intangible digital assets. They're not the house on your street, right? A house for sale has really narrow, specific utility. You live in it with X number of family members, has so many floors and X number of bedrooms in such and such a neighborhood. But a domain's utility maybe $250 for one company and $250 million for another. And that is what makes domain names so magical of an asset. And we will never be an asset class its value is properly reflected in reported sales or comps. They're just not relevant, in my opinion. They never have been for me. Which brings me to appraisals, which are kind of a relative or a cousin of that. Appraisals and domain names right now are completely worthless, and I think we know that, and there are people trying to fix it. It's something Hilco wants to try to do because they do appraisals in so many other major asset classes. But right now, they're pretty hurtful to the value. And a quick example, I was recently in a pretty serious negotiation for a single-word super premium domain with a company that wanted it and really should acquire it as their exact match domain. And despite my own experience, they insisted on getting an appraisal from a known third party that I'll keep nameless. And we were asking $1.5 million, which by all standards was like a really reasonable price for this domain, not crazy. And the appraiser came back at $200,000 with a list of comparable sales from, here we go again, the publicly reported list that was thrown together what looked to me like an automated template bearing the appraiser's name, and which is credible. The name of the appraiser is credible. And in fact, the appraising company, which really blew me away, did not include a sale that they had made and reported weeks earlier for $2 million on the appraisal. And I'm looking at it and saying, how can they just do this without their own sale? So my entire time was spent trying to unwind the damage and convince management and a board of three members of a board of directors, VCs, to basically ignore the appraisal that they spent money for. And we have seen so many posts, recently about GoDaddy, because they have that 25,000. This was not GoDaddy, by the way, but they have the 25,000 plus automated, which I know Mike tells me they're working on. And that just doesn't work. So I have sold domains for $150,000 that might have been appraised at $1 million, and I've sold domains for $5 million that have been appraised at $150,000. And at the end of the day, domains are purchased by a buyer that understands how they have a path to exponential enterprise value and utility. That's what happens. Rocco, right? Which speaks of another mistake that I think is often made, is assuming who the logical buyer of a domain name will be. I can pretty much say with strong conviction that most of my largest deals were done with a buyer that was absolutely unintuitive and less obvious to me. Since I'm supposed to kind of be talking about some secrets, that's the name of this thing, right? I'll give you guys one. My success has been almost unequivocally due to my network, and now Hilco's network, which is amazing. And that's my gold strength. I've been spending 25 years building those connections in that network. And that allows me to do two things. One, I can cast a wide net on domains to connect with the less intuitive potential acquirers. And two, apply my concept of, like I said earlier, marinating domain names. So I'm a foodie, like my wife and my family are self-proclaimed foodies. The best steak, fish, vegetables are marinated for a long time. And the same with the best domain names. So my strategy is always to make sure as many people are aware of the domains that I am working on or have. And it's really rare that someone sees a domain name and like the next day, oh, we'll make a $2 million offer. Happens, but it's, you're fishing in, an ocean versus a barrel for that one. Let it marinate, and when the moment comes, when the domain makes sense and is ready for using, the phone will ring, and then it becomes the champion calling, right? And strictly a negotiation at that point. And I can't tell you how many of my deals have happened just like that, which is why I only work on domains for long-term partnerships, because you have to let it marinate, and you have to cast the wide net and be patient. Sometimes it's fast, sometimes it takes longer. So backing into that second story, December 2020, time flies, it seems like yesterday, I was overseeing the sale of Home.com, which I think a lot of people have read about and speculated on falsely. After casting the wide net, I received a call from a buddy of mine, personal friend, who is a top decision maker at Fairway Independent Mortgage, $65 billion, third largest mortgage originator in the U.S. And he was intrigued with Home.com, and he wanted to set up a call to discuss it. So Fairway is a really unique company. It's owned by the employees. It's an ESOP. It's 54% owned by the founder, and the rest is owned by the employees. And so they're really unique in how they operate. So this first call is with the founder CEO, who's the majority shareholder, and literally 22 executives. And never done this one before. And after a lengthy call and a lot of educating, we waited the next steps. And I had a follow-up call with a smaller group, one, which we'll come back to, Jessica, I'm going to name her because she's awesome, the president of digital, in charge of a major company initiative and growth, which was the largest mortgage companies, Rocket Mortgage, Quicken. They do $330 million of that year. They had done mortgages, 90% online, direct to consumer. Fairway does $65 billion, 90% human brokers and offices. So how does Fairway close the gap from 330 to from 95, 65 to 330 billion? They have to do it online and direct to consumer. So I did this call with Jess, with the smaller group, and my friend who had initially reached out, and they were clearly those champions that are necessary for a deal of this magnitude to happen. So then, December 27th, I had a call with the CEO, who owns 54%, as I said, who matter-of-factly informed me, and I wrote this down, I quote, "We are passing. Despite my entire team wanting me to acquire the domain, my job is to sometimes say no." So at that moment, the deal was absolutely dead in the water. I don't know if Jason's here, but I didn't tell Larry and those guys. I just kind of sat on it and said, "We're still good. We're working on it." Keep them calm. And I made the strategic decision to wait until the new year. It was December 27th. So mid-January, I reached out to the president of Digital, who said something that I will never forget, and I've been doing this a long time. She said, "I can't sleep at night knowing I don't have that domain." Bell goes off in my head. All right, we got this. We'll figure this out. So that, my friends, is the essence of having a champion and the importance of marinating. I spent the next 2 weeks helping arm her with ammunition and getting my buddy, who had the ear of the CEO, to remain her champion. So she was the champion of the domain. He was her champion. We had things kind of going and lined up. There was one other thing happening in the background that was really key. They wanted me to acquire the exact match domain fairway.com, which was owned by a long-time, big Fortune 100 type corporate client that I worked with forever. And the home.com owners said, if they acquire Fairway, they'll be out on home. And I'm like, you guys have it wrong. I see it exactly the opposite. If we get Fairway, they'll want home and need it even more. And the day we acquired Fairway, big day for them, I had a call with the CEO, who was, again, the majority owner, the guy who said no. And he's a former, very Big Ten Division I college basketball player, so serious hoops player. And I said to him, all right, now that we have that, let's go get Michael Jordan, and being home.com. And he simply replied, let's do it. And that was it. One of the bigger domain deals ever was agreed to that day. So selling a domain is more like art than science, but negotiating the deal once the buyer wants the asset is the science. It's easy to sell a domain. It's so easy to sell a domain for millions less than what could have been. And I'm sure that came into play with the awesome recent sale of Connect.com, which my friend Lewis negotiated so brilliantly. I've had so many deals that were won by having a grasp on that science and negotiation. Heard a lot about that yesterday. Because you got to remember, it's not always about the specific domain name. Sometimes it's about the buyer, not the domain. And we are in like an amazing place as an industry. I mean, I feel like in all my time doing this is the strongest it's ever been. And it's kind of an honor to have been in it for so many years and be aligned with, now I'm aligned, I got to give my little Hilco pitch here, aligned with such a great company and the leading, asset investor and advisor in the world in Hilco as we kind of go into digital assets together. And I'm really excited for what lies ahead. My DMs are always open for anyone who wants to do business. Anyone wants to just call and shoot the shit and, have a question answered or give some advice. And got a cool, the cool NFT panel in a little while that Braden's moderating on blue chip NFTs. I think that's the next. Domains are, phenomenal, but NFTs are the next multi-trillion-dollar market. And I'm going to do the rest of this with my buddy JT. We do Sherpa together, so he'll come up here and we'll have a little talk. But hopefully that was helpful. And go from there. Take the glasses off for this one.
All right. That was great. So we probably got about 5, maybe 10 minutes.
Yeah.
But I think, what I think is great with something like this is that you get an opportunity to get perspectives across the board from people who really, walk the walk. And one thing that I've seen through, and this was consistent across what Rick said, what you said, was just the idea that when you're selling big premium domain names, that it's a process and how long the process takes. So for a deal like Home or some of the other big deals that you've done, are we talking 6 months? Are we talking a year? I mean, we see it, obviously at Media Options. And I think we've heard it from a lot of the experts as well. But what do you think is your sort of typical for these big time deals?
So Home, despite my story, started in mid-December, of 20 and closed on February 1st, which is late. The story doesn't seem that way because it was dead on December 27th and revived on January 21st or whatever it was. But that's fast, right? I mean, I always say to people, chocolate.com, which was ours, and now I'm reselling for the owner. But before that, it took me 5 years to sell that thing, right? I mean, so at the right price and the right circumstance. So I think, I don't think you control that. I think all you can really do is, unless you're in a hurry and you want to sell it 20, 30 cents on the dollar, of course, there's always a price to liquidate fast. But if you don't need to sell fast, then you got to kind of cast that wide net and marinate, because you can't. What do people do, right? They get a domain name. We all do it. Oh, there's 35, like I said, intuitive buyers, whether it's an exact match or a category, and you reach out and you contact those 35, and they don't get it. And like I said, they usually aren't the ones who buy it. But if you really know how to cast a really wide net, then you have to wait. As a matter of fact, talking about that, I just two just examples that jump out. So I sold treadmill.com, the Icon Fitness, last year. They were a dead, and I know those guys, and they were a dead pass, hard pass. One day the phone rang Monday morning. You still have that? Yep. We want to buy it. Same price? Yep. Done. 10 minutes. And I'm like, what happened? And I Googled Icon Fitness, and that morning they announced they had raised $200 million, private equity round. I'm like, So maybe they had wanted it. Maybe it didn't work. Maybe that moment came up. And then similarly, I sold affiliate.com, a 7-figure deal, right, very recently, and same thing. 3 months in, got a phone call from the buyer, and he's like, you still have that? I'm ready. And he never had even responded, and he's a friend, actually, to an initial email. So I think, to me, it's about casting the wide net and marinating it,
We have a question here in the audience.
I think
so the question, just for the benefit of the audio that we're recording, is that, are you seeing that marinating window that you discussed, are you seeing that shrinking?
I mean, I think on a deal, I could have certain deals I've done that I would say, yeah, it's shrinking. I definitely think the needle's moving, but I don't think it's moving as fast as everyone would like, right? I mean, I still think it's, I still think there's a lot of end users who just don't understand this no matter what, don't get it. And you can't force it, right? You can't, if a company doesn't want to buy a domain name, or for whatever reason they don't want to buy it, whether they're right or wrong, in my mind, they're all fucking idiots. But if they're not right or wrong in my mind, it doesn't matter. They're not going to buy the domain name just because I tell them they're wrong, right? So it's I think the marinating has always been the case. The champion, I think finding the champion has always been the case. And as I said, and I think if you can, especially in a big company. So I think it's getting better, but I don't think it's suddenly, it's not easy, right? It's not bang, now you can just sell domains, by the hour.
And I think that's a really important point, too. When you talk about, and the reason why I think it's important to put this out there is that, as folks enter into the space and start investing in domain names, everyone has this process, right? And we talk about this on Domain Sherpa and the Off the Market Forever show that we started doing with Chris and James Isles.
Great show, by the way.
And thank you. Yeah, you'll be on there soon enough, too. But, the idea is really trying to get people so they understand when you're talking about trying to sell these big domains, because these domainers, as they go through sort of their journey, if they are ultimately going to be successful in that space where they're selling the big premium domains, they need to understand how that works. It's an entirely different animal than trying to, buy low and then, sell on, Afternic and Dan on their landers, right? And I think the piece that you mentioned about where you're really trying to find it, and almost have to educate the customer, but you're trying to find people within a large organization who have the ability to move the needle, move the ball down the field. There's an art to that. Your network is key for that, being able to get to the right people. And what I find really interesting, and this is why I even mentioned your network even before you came up on stage, is that you have the kind of Rolodex that you can get to these people at a lot of places. Almost every deal that you talk about involves not a personal relationship, but a relationship that existed previously. So it's you talk about this marinating, and in a lot of ways you're talking about years and years.
And that's why, that's quite frankly, that's why I formed this company with Hilco, because I thought my network was good. These guys, this is world craziness, right?
Yeah.
Their network is just nuts in their corporate relationships and their name, which I didn't even realize. So, but I think to me, the marinating, you can't always find, if you're trying to sell chocolate.com to Nestle's with 25,000 employees or Unilever, right? The odds of finding that champion are not easy. It's not an easy, Rocco's are not easy to find. Rocco found me in the case of beer.com, which also, right, happens because we put out a press release. In those days, that was, in those days, buying a domain was big news, so you could actually put out a press release, and it actually got traction in the beginning. So I think how you got to just work on casting that net, and somebody will get it, and somebody will realize it's time to cook.
Well, and I think the patience, persistence, all that stuff is key. So I think we're running up on time. I think we maybe have time for one more question if we've got one from the audience. All right, we got right here.
Yeah, we're talking about NDAs. How do you handle that when it's an end user that actually wants to benefit from disclosing it?
Okay, so the question, and just to phrase it, make sure I'm correct, is that when you're dealing with it, when you have an NDA in place and you have the buyer that wants to publicize it.
I can say this. I mean, if the buyer wants it, the buyer will get it. I can tell you, I don't think I can remember a single deal over. I've done 40 plus 7 and 8 figure domain deals, and I don't think I remember one, unless we were the buyer and we want. But I don't think I can remember one, as an advisor that the buyer wanted to disclose the price. And part of that is because I don't want them to. Part of my process is to tell them I don't think they should, but I've never really, I don't think, if they want to, they will.
And the last piece on this, and then we got to wrap this up and move on to the next session. I think, that's one of the challenges we deal with in the domain space is the lack of transparency, which then drives further lack of liquidity. But that's why when, you do have people in the space, and a big shout out to like George Kirikos and Jamie Zock and Elliot Silver and, the folks that do go out of their way to literally scour corporate filings and everything else to find out what those premium names sell for, because that does, that matters.
Just one, because I know we're out of time, one last thing on that, and you just said, I don't think it's a negative that we have less information. I think it's a positive. Like I said, a house is getting sold, like we said, my house is on my street, there's a range, right? They're here to here, maybe here to here even. If, like I said, a domain may be worth $250 to this guy and $250 million to this guy. And if you find the guy that's worth $250 million for, he'll happily pay $3 million. The guy who's worth $250 for is irrelevant. So if everything was a comp, you'd be boxed in narrower, and you wouldn't do, mid upper 8-figure deals or high 7-figure deals or whatever. They just might not happen. So I view it as a positive, the secrecy and the because it's worth a domain. I have a friend who founded a company. He bought his domain. I'm not going to say what it is, just in case they wouldn't want me to. But he sold his company for $1.8 billion after buying his domain for a few million, and changing the name of the company. And he would say, if he was up here and he were willing to be, that domain was worth $500 million to his $1.7 billion exit. $500 million, 2 years from inception, buying it and changing the name to selling the company. The company was wildly successful before that, but he would say it was worth $500 million to him. So does it matter if he paid 2, 3, or 8, right, at the end of the day? So that's why I like it being secretive. Almost.
Yeah, and we see that also, Ring.com and, a lot of transactions that have taken place where the name, literally was rocket fuel, for the company from a branding standpoint and a lot of that. So, all right, well, look, this was great.
Thanks, man.
Thanks for taking the time, and thank you to everybody here. We're going to keep it moving.